John sat back in the wooden chair of the Plough pub. He was fiddling with his half-finished pint of beer, looking at his watch. The wait was depressing. His stomach was clawing at the thought, not because his wife was late, but because of the feeling he had been trying to suppress for the last few weeks. The feeling that something had gone wrong. Robert, his best friend, was sitting next to him, sipping a non-alcoholic beer. He was starting his night shift at the factory soon, and he was trying to stay sober. They both worked at the same company, a tough but stable job that kept them afloat. Unlike Robert, John had always tried to plan for the future. He and Emma were saving for a down payment on a house, and dreaming of how one day they would throw away her pills and have children. But today, despite the usual ritual of meeting friends in the pub, something inside John was turning over restlessly. He was clutching his beer mug so tightly that his knuckles were white. Emma had promised to come, but she was late, which was happening too often lately. "Everything okay?" Robert asked, noticing his sullen expression. "Yeah, I'm fine," John waved his hand, trying to force a smile, but it came out crooked. They had been friends since childhood. Robert had never been the model of reliability, an eternal gambler, always a little irresponsible. But despite all his faults, John considered him a loyal friend. After all, it was Robert who had stood by him at their wedding, and as befits a best man, had also thrown him a grand stag party, which, however, ended with John ending up in Scotland with no money and a headache. At the time, it had seemed like just a silly adventure, but now, remembering those events, John felt a strange feeling of bitterness. Maybe he should have realized then that Robert could not be completely trusted. The wait dragged on. John looked at his watch again and typed a message. "Are you coming?" There was no answer. "She's probably working late," Robert suggested, noticing John checking his phone for the umpteenth time. "You know, the supermarket is always full." "Yeah, I guess," John muttered, but deep down he felt that it was not so. Emma's behavior had begun to change 3 months ago, when he returned from a refresher course. At first, it had been strangely good. They spent a lot of time together. Their intimate life had suddenly blossomed with new colors. John thought it was just the joy of reuniting after separation. But after a few weeks, everything went wrong. Emma began to distance herself, and their intimacy almost disappeared. There were many little things that he hadn't paid attention to before: constant excuses, a decrease in salary, strange work schedules. And then there were those moments when she flirted. Emma always played with men with her eyes and smile, but now this flirting became more restrained. At first, John thought it was because of him, that she was trying to behave more correctly. But later he realized that this was a sign that her interest was directed somewhere else. He sighed and took another sip of beer. It was hard for him to share these suspicions even with himself, let alone someone else. "Have you ever noticed that Emma has changed?" John asked casually, looking at his friend over the edge of his mug. "What do you mean?" Robert raised an eyebrow, but quickly went back to his non-alcoholic beer. "I wouldn't say. She's always been the same as before." John nodded, but his friend's words only strengthened his doubts. If anyone could notice something was wrong, it was Robert, but it seemed that he didn't see anything. Or didn't want to see anything. "She's just been acting weird lately," John continued, trying not to look too worried. "Less time at home, more time at work." Robert shrugged. "Well, everyone has those periods. You're too worried." John didn't answer. Robert might be right, but that didn't explain why every time Emma came home from one of her shifts, her hair smelled different than usual. Or why there was that special sparkle in her eyes sometimes, the same one he used to see when they first started dating. While John was thinking about all this, the door of the pub opened and Emma walked in. She looked flawless. Her blonde hair was neatly styled, her lips lightly tinted. She smiled as she approached their table and kissed John on the cheek. "Hi guys. Sorry I'm late, I was held up at work." Robert winked at John, as if to say, "See, everything is fine." But John knew that everything was far from fine. He felt something click inside him, like a piece of a puzzle falling into place, but it made the picture even more disturbing. He continued to sit quietly, watching Emma chat casually with Robert, as if nothing was happening. But now John was sure of one thing: he had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Since that meeting in the pub, John's suspicions had only grown stronger. Emma acted as if nothing had happened, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had become a stranger in his own life. Her work schedule changed more often than usual. Shifts at the supermarket sometimes started later, sometimes were unexpectedly longer. The house was increasingly in disarray, not like before, when she liked to keep things cozy. One single word was growing and gaining strength in John's mind: betrayal. He knew that he needed to know the truth. And the sooner the better. He couldn't track her down himself, his new schedule at the factory was tight, and taking a holiday was out of the question anytime soon. And then he had an idea: Robert. "Hey Rob," John began at the next meeting in the pub. "I need to ask you something." Robert, sitting opposite him with a glass of lager, raised his eyebrows. "Sure, John, anything." John leaned forward, holding back his awkwardness. It was hard to say out loud what was spinning around in his head. "I think Emma is cheating on me." For a moment, something elusive flashed in Robert's eyes, but he quickly hid it behind a surprised expression. "Are you serious? Emma? Come on, you know how much she loves you. She would never do that." "I thought so too, but something has changed." John ran a hand over his face, feeling tired of all this uncertainty. "Could you help me? Just keep an eye on her on the days when you have the morning shift. See where she goes after work." Robert pretended to think about it, although in reality he had already made up his mind. "Of course I will," he said finally, nodding. "If it will calm you down, I will do everything I can." John felt some relief. He believed that Robert was the kind of person who would not let him down. They had been friends since childhood, and who, if not a best friend, would help in a situation like this? "Thank you, Rob." John patted him on the shoulder. "I knew I could count on you." Meanwhile, Robert had a completely different thought in his head. He knew that now he would have to act more carefully. He couldn't let John find out anything. The affair with Emma had already lasted for several months, and they enjoyed every stolen moment. Now they had to be even more careful. The next few days were torture for John. Robert regularly reported that nothing suspicious was happening. "I checked everything," he assured. "Emma just stays late at work, sometimes meets with colleagues, but nothing unusual." "You're just worrying in vain." John nodded, trying to convince himself that Robert was right. But his doubts did not disappear. And Robert's overly confident assurances that everything was fine and Emma was not dating anyone also made John wary. This did not give him peace. Then he decided to do something that had previously seemed crazy to him. He installed several miniature cameras in their house and turned on an application on his phone to track his wife's movements. The cameras were hidden in the bedroom and in the living room, where Emma was most often alone. John knew that this was an extreme measure, but he no longer saw any other way out. A week passed in anxious anticipation, and the cameras did not show anything suspicious. Emma behaved as usual. But one day, John noticed something strange. On their calendar, where they recorded their work schedules, Emma was listed as working from 4 p.m. But cameras showed her leaving home at 10 a.m., too early to start her shift. Moreover, her phone was still at home. It looked like she had deliberately left it behind, so that John couldn't track her location. "Where are you going, Emma?" John said quietly, sitting in the car and looking at her icon, frozen motionless on the app map. The next day, John took another step that should have put everything in its place. He had a spare copy of Robert's apartment key. Robert had once given it to him, just in case. Now that case had come. John went to his friend's house, took 2 miniature Wi-Fi cameras and hid them in Robert's apartment, one in the living room, the other in the bedroom. Now all that was left was to wait. A few days later, his suspicions were confirmed. On the phone screen, he saw Emma enter Robert's apartment. They didn't just meet, they behaved like lovers and went straight to the bedroom. The cameras recorded her starting to clean his apartment, as if she had gotten used to being here, like she was at home. 2 hours later, they came out of the bedroom, smiling. John sat in the dark room, lit only by the cold light of the monitor, and reviewed the footage from the cameras installed in Robert's apartment. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his face remained impassive. He watched Emma, his wife, having a fun and carefree time with another man, his best, as he used to think of a friend. John felt like the world was crumbling under his feet. But now he had the truth. All that was left was to decide what to do next. He copied the recording to his phone, taking several screenshots with clear timestamps. Now he had evidence he could use. But John knew that this was not enough. Before telling Emma and Robert the truth, he needed to come up with the right plan of action to see their reactions live. The next morning, John did something he had not counted on. He stayed home, pretending to be sick, and monitored Emma's actions. Her shift was scheduled to start at 4 p.m., but at 10 a.m. she left the house again, grabbing her bag. John waited for her to leave, then went out himself and, keeping his distance, followed her at a short distance. She walked a familiar route. And, as John suspected, she headed straight for Robert's house. She looked back, but not noticing anything suspicious, went inside. He sat in the car nearby, checking the time with her shift calendar. A bitter thought flashed through his head. She spends her days with him, and comes home to me, pretending that everything is fine. John took a few pictures with his phone. Emma at Robert's door, the clock on the car screen, corresponding to her work schedule. This is definitely the end, John whispered, feeling how something inside him finally broke. Returning home, John began to prepare for the decisive step. He printed out the photos and put them in an envelope. He knew that it would be impossible to resist their lies. Besides, he had drafted a separation agreement and put it in the same envelope. Then he called Robert. "Meet me at the Plough tonight, before your shift?" John asked, trying to sound as casual as possible. "Sure," Robert replied. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I just want to discuss a few things." "Emma's coming too," John added casually. Robert hesitated for a moment, but then, as if nothing had happened, he replied, "Great, I'll see you there." John grinned. Perfect. He had no idea what was coming. That evening, John arrived at the pub half an hour before the appointed time. He chose a quiet table in the corner and set up an old phone on a stand, turning on the video recorder. He was going to record their reactions on camera, as proof of their lies. At exactly 5 o'clock in the evening, Robert arrived. He looked relaxed, but when he saw John's serious expression, he tensed up a little. "What's going on?" Robert asked, sitting down at the table and taking a sip of beer. "Wait," John replied, not taking his eyes off him. "Emma's coming soon, and I want to discuss this with her." Robert was clearly nervous, but he tried to hide it behind a relaxed smile. John watched him silently, feeling a cold satisfaction that his friend had no idea what was about to happen. A few minutes later, Emma walked in, looking as perfect as ever. She walked up to John, touched his shoulder, and smiled. "What is this secret meeting, darling?" she asked, sitting down next to him. John slowly leaned back in his chair and looked at them both. There was no emotion in his voice, only cold determination. "How long have you been sleeping together?" Emma paled, and Robert froze, not knowing what to say. They both tried to deny the obvious, but John calmly took an envelope from his pocket and laid the photographs on the table. They showed Emma entering Robert's apartment and leaving it 2 hours later. In another photo, they were embracing like lovers. "Don't lie to me," John said, not raising his voice. "I already know everything." Emma sighed and looked away. Her face went white as paper when she realized that denying anything was useless. "It happened," she finally whispered. "But it doesn't mean anything. I love you more, John, please." "More? What do you mean?" John interrupted her, smiling mockingly. "So you love him too? And what percentage of your love do I have if you decided to cheat on me?" Emma covered her face with her hands, and Robert squeezed out an apology. "I'm sorry, John. It was just an accident. I love her, but she loves you." John was seething with anger, looking at them both coldly. "Forgive me? I considered you a friend and trusted you, and you used my wife, hoping that I would not find out the truth. And how could I ever trust you?" John turned away, trying to pull himself together and not start a fight. "So you both betrayed me. You're like a friend, and you're like a wife." Emma sobbed, reaching out to John. "I'll choose you. I'm willing to do anything to get us back." John paused for a long moment before answering, his voice cold and distant. "Everything? Okay. Then we'll start with you regaining my trust, but on my terms." Emma looked at him with concern. "What do you mean?" "This will be your punishment," John replied, "for everything you've done. Do you want to save our marriage? Then prove that this is really important to you." He pulled a piece of paper out of the drawer and placed it in front of Emma. "This is a list of things you have to do for me to even consider forgiving you." Emma took the paper with trembling hands and ran her eyes over the text. It listed the conditions. 1. Open correspondence. Emma had to give John access to all of her phones and accounts. 2. A complete break with Robert. He was not to be in their lives anymore. 3. Weekly couples counseling with a therapist to restore the lost trust. 4. Fulfilling the promise made to John, never to lie about anything again. 5. Symbolic action. To prove the seriousness of her intentions, Emma had to give up something that was important to her. Emma looked at John pleadingly. "Do you seriously want me to do all this?" "This is just the beginning, Emma," he answered coldly. "If you are ready to fight for us, you will do it. If not, then I will file for divorce." His words hit her like a hammer. Emma sat silently, clutching the piece of paper, tears streaming down her cheeks. She knew she wouldn't get another chance. John stood up from the table and looked at them both. "And yes, Robert," he added, turning to his former friend, "if I ever see you with my wife again, you'll regret being born." Without waiting for an answer, he left the pub, leaving them alone. That evening, John sent a final message that would end his relationship with Robert. He forwarded a video of him sleeping with his wife to their boss, Mr. Harper. A few minutes later, he received a terse reply, "See you at the factory." The factory was tense in the morning. Robert appeared pale, as if he knew his life was about to change. John barely glanced at him as he passed. Mr. Harper's car was parked in the lot, although he usually left before lunch. An hour later, shouts were heard from the boss's office. A few minutes later, Robert emerged from there with a twisted face and hastily packed things. His career was ruined. The factory began to whisper as he walked across the shop floor towards the exit. John watched this scenario with cold satisfaction. Everyone got what they deserved. In the evening, Emma tried to talk to John again. "We can definitely get through this, right?" she asked, looking at him with despair. He slowly looked up at her and said, "Maybe." She began to cry again, and he just looked at her, motionless. "I'll find a way to earn your forgiveness," she whispered, burying her face in his shoulder. But John was no longer sure that forgiveness was even possible. Emma tried to get back into the swing of things, cooking dinners, cleaning the house, trying to be attentive and affectionate. But John remained distant. All her efforts seemed insincere to him. He no longer felt the trust that had connected them before. Every time Emma tried to hug him or have a heart-to-heart talk, he pulled away. He knew that no matter what she did, this crack in their marriage would remain forever. One evening, when they were sitting at dinner, Emma broke the silence. "I know you don't believe me. But I'm ready to fix this, John. We can start over. Get out of here. Start a new life." John continued to eat, not looking at her. Then he put down his fork and said quietly, "I'm not leaving." Emma froze, her eyes filled with fear. "But why? Everything here reminds you of him, and of what happened. Don't you want to forget?" John looked coldly into her eyes. "Because leaving means running away. And I'm not running." Emma covered her face with her hands and began to cry. "I regret this so much. Please, give me a chance." John looked at her with an indifference he hadn't expected from himself. "A chance?" he asked. "You had so many chances and all my trust, but you betrayed me and chose him." Emma sobbed and tried to touch his hand, but he pulled away. The next day, John decided that it was a waste of time, that there was no way to fix their relationship, and that it was time to finish the job. He got the separation papers and took them to a law firm to file for divorce. It hurt, but he knew that if he did, he would never be himself again. When he got home, he found Emma sitting on the couch with her parents. They had come to support her, but John could tell that they were disappointed too. Her father was silent and sullen, and her mother was looking at John reproachfully, as if she hoped that he would change his mind. "I'm going to take my things and move in with a friend for a week," John announced, walking into the bedroom. "I'll give you time to decide where you want to live next." Emma ran out after him. "Don't do this. Please, I beg you." He stopped and turned to her. "We both know this is the end, Emma. You betrayed me with the man I considered a brother. There is no fix." Emma fell to her knees, sobbing. "I love you. I would do anything to bring us back." John shook his head. "Love is not promises or words. It is trust. And it is gone." The last night in their shared apartment was quiet. Emma tried to talk to John, but he always avoided the conversation. He had already made up his mind. A few weeks passed. Emma was still living in their apartment, but John had already rented a room in another area. They met only to discuss legal matters. She was still trying to get him back, but every gesture, every word she said only strengthened his determination to end it once and for all. One evening, John received a message from Robert. "I'm leaving town. I'm sorry for everything. Take care of yourself." He stared at the screen of his phone for a long time before deleting the message. This was the end of not only their friendship, but also an entire chapter of his life. The last meeting with Emma took place in their former apartment. She signed the divorce papers, barely holding back her tears. "Are you sure you don't want to try again?" she asked as he was about to leave. John paused at the threshold. Many memories flashed through his mind, their first dates, their wedding, their dreams together. But he knew that they were all poisoned by betrayal. "Yes, I'm sure," he answered quietly and walked out the door without turning around. A cool autumn wind blew outside. John inhaled it deeply, feeling a strange relief. He was no longer that naive person who trusted everyone and everything. Now he knew, sometimes love is not enough to keep people together. A new life was ahead. And John was ready to face it without regrets. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.